plain weave, twilled weave, reverse weave, Dutch weave, broad weave, weaving woven wire mesh. I know, I probably keep saying, oh, it's this thing that's the most important part of woven wire mesh. But philosophically speaking, what is woven wire mesh without the weave? We just have a wire with no purpose. Very sad. Without a weave pattern or weave type, there literally is no woven wire mesh. So yes, it's actually this thing that's the most important part of woven wire mesh. It's not alloy. Alloy's the next episode, definitely not, so this one. And you've probably noticed through the last couple episodes that there's a lot of different weave types out there. Like, look at this. What is that? What the heck is going on there? This apparently can be woven, but what if I were to tell you could know exactly what the heck is going on here? Well, generally speaking, because most of these weaves are in fact proprietary, but what if I could tell you you can know generally what the heck is going on here? It all starts with breaking some things down. I spouted it off really quickly at the beginning, but plain weave, twilled weave, Dutch weave, reverse weave, broad weave, those are your tickets to understanding weave patterns. I'll break them all down, show how you can mix and match some of them, and why these weave types actually exist. So, without further ado, this is a green screen, so I have to stay here actually. Plain weave, it's actually how we get square mesh, so pretty simple. So how it works is you take a warp wire and perpendicularly you weave it under the weft wire, then over the weft wire, then under the weft wire, then over the weft wire, etc. And same with the weft wire, you go perpendicular to the warp wire and you go over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, until boom, you have a square mesh, a plain weave. So it's very uniform. It makes a very nice symmetrical grid pattern if you look at it straight on. It's very easy to identify what's going on just by glancing at it, unlike literally everything else. So what makes it a plain weave is that it always goes over one wire, then under one wire. Never under two or over three or under one and over two. But I did want to mention that there is a basket weaving technique that is technically a plain weave. It looks like this. Two wires go under two, then two wires go over two, and then over and over and over again. But the two wires are actually just for strength and they literally represent one wire. They're just doubled up. You could triple or even quadruple this too. But I cannot stress how rare this is in woven wire mesh. Just because you can weave it doesn't mean it's gonna be used for anything. So now, moving on to the more complex stuff. This is an example of a twilled weave. So what's going on here? At first glance, you can always tell it's a twilled weave by this diagonal pattern that is created. And also the diagonal pattern can keep going. It doesn't have to form lines or checkerboards like this. That's just an example in design mesh. But if we were to look at twilled mesh underneath a loop, we would see this. So if we look at the weft wires first, we can see that there isn't an over one, under one pattern. There's actually an over two, under two pattern. And same thing with the warp wire, over two, under two. And having the weft wires going under and over more wires than one allows the ability to offset the wires every time it goes down a row. Each weft row shifts over by one, which is what creates that diagonal pattern. And basically, twilled weaves only really have an over-under pattern of two. You can see three, it's very rare, so you'll mostly be seeing two. You can't ever have one though. Always has to be two or more. And as you can see, you will always have a diagonal pattern when we're talking about twilled mesh. That is what makes it twilled. All right, so those are the more basic weave types. Now it's time to get into some more specialty types. I'm gonna need a green screen for this. This is a Dutch weave, and this is a Dutch weave, and this also is a Dutch weave. The similarities are self-evident, so I don't really need to go into what a Dutch weave is. So there's a couple features that makes a Dutch weave Dutch. First, the warp wire is always going to be larger than the weft wire. There, and there. And second, Dutch uses the maximum amount of weft wires as possible. They're basically pushed up right against each other. There, and there. And the warp wire is made to have very few wires, not as little as possible, but a lot less than the weft. So Dutch is just large and fewer warp wires with a small maximum amount of weft wires. Moving on to reverse weave. All right, so reverse weave is actually really easy. Take any weave where the warp wire is bigger than the weft wire and reverse that. That's it. Now the weft wire is bigger than the warp wire. Now, a broad weave is just a way to say that the distance between the warp, weft, or weft and warp wires are further apart from each other. Now, look at this plain weave. It's a 50 mesh. Now, look at this weave. It's a 5 mesh. This would be considered a broad mesh because the distance between the weft and warp wires in this case are further apart from each other compared to the 50 mesh. It's a little subjective though, because if you were working with a, say, 500 mesh, then a 50 mesh would be considered broad comparatively. But if you were working with a broad weave where the distance between the wires is basically 0, then literally any weave is considered a broad weave. So a little odd subjective term, but I figured I'd let you know its place. So that begs the question, can I have a broad twilled reverse Dutch weave? Oh yeah. So here's the thing, you can combine most of these weave patterns. And honestly, the only weave pattern you can't combine is a plain weave and a twilled weave. They inherently cannot exist at the same time. Plain weaves exist because they're so simple and they're so symmetrical and they keep that grid pattern. But when you twill a weave, that symmetry is broken. So think of plain weave and twilled weave as your base patterns for your mesh. So after you choose your plain or twilled weave, you can choose to make them Dutch. Take a look at this plain Dutch weave. It maintains the symmetry of that over one, under one pattern, but the Dutch aspect of it turns that square weave you'd normally see into a rectangular weave. And the larger warp wire doesn't affect the plain weave, so they perfectly coexist at the same time. Now look at a twilled Dutch weave. This is an over 2, under 2 twilled weave, but there are a lot more weft wires. And the warp wires are larger and further apart. But the wires are still offset every row down, so it maintains that twilled diagonal pattern. So twilled and Dutch go very well together. Now how about a reverse plain Dutch weave? Oh yeah, it can happen. Same idea as the Dutch plain weave, except the warp wires are smaller and close together, and the weft wires are larger and further apart. It's basically the same as a plain Dutch weave, except you... Need I say more? And same thing with a reverse twilled Dutch weave. If the warp is bigger than the weft, you can reverse it. Now what about a broad plain Dutch weave? No. Yeah. You just move the openings a little further apart and boom, broad plain Dutch weave. Twilled Dutch weave? Pfft, more like broad twilled Dutch weave. And lastly, what about a reverse plain Dutch weave? Or a reverse broad twilled Dutch weave? Surely this is impossible. Yeah. But why, Andrew? Why? Why must I twill my mesh? Why do I need a plain Dutch weave? It can't just be because it looks cool, right? That's actually called architectural mesh, which is solely built for aesthetics. Please check out our W.S. Tyler architectural page to find out more. But for all the weaves I've talked about, yes, they all have practical and specific applications. And all these applications, it's actually a lot simpler than you might think. It's all about getting a weave that is as strong as possible with a micron rating as small as possible. So if that's the case, then you want two things out of your filter cloth. One, you want a weave small enough to catch the particles, and two, you want it to be able to withstand the pressure of the filtration process. At a base level, that's what you want out of your filter cloth. Since a plain weave or a square mesh with a 20 micron opening is extremely brittle, you're going to need a more intense weave that will toughen up the mesh that will still have the right micron rating. Take a look at this Dutch twilled weave. This particular Dutch twilled weave has a pore size range of 7 micron to 121 micron. But if you look at this reverse plain Dutch weave, it has a pore size range from 20 micron to 200 micron. The opening sizes aren't really customizable from weave to weave. So if you know the size range of the particles you want to filter, then it will become pretty obvious which type of weave you'll actually want to go with. Now for a different example. Take a look at this plain Dutch weave. It can filter particles anywhere from 15 to 40 micron. Now look at this broad mesh twilled Dutch weave. It has a particle size range of 13 to 55 micron. So you might ask, why would I ever use the plain Dutch weave? The broad twilled Dutch weave can filter a larger range of particles in both directions. So why would I choose the other one? First, if you don't have particles going down to 13 micron, and your particles don't surpass 40 micron, then there's not much of a point to use the broad weave. But actually, this little ordinary old plain Dutch weave has a trick up its sleeve. It's called high flow and is engineered a bit more than most plain Dutch weaves. It could actually filter a lot quicker than the broad twilled Dutch weave. So there actually can be some specific perks to using one over the other, but that usually comes down to more proprietary weaves. Just get in touch with a W.S. Tyler sales representative to get your own high flow. But just in general, each weave relates more or less to durability and size range. And boom, woven wire mesh. We finally did it, guys. We now know everything there is to know about the fundamental structure and shape and measurements of woven wire mesh. Wire. What's the wire made of? Probably should have an episode on that. So the next episode will be the final episode of the series. I know I wish it could go on forever too, but it will be on the alloys of woven wire mesh. It's made of stainless steel, it's fine. We'll talk about that in the next episode. And spoiler alert, it's gonna be a good one. It's also gonna be a really, really long one. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you around in the final episode.